14 hours after she boarded a bus to Texas, eager to finally spend the weekend with the man she loved, police would find her lifeless body inside his apartment. She had traveled across state lines for love, but what she uncovered inside that small apartment would seal her fate forever. A secret so disturbing, it turned the man she trusted most into her killer. Stay with me, because this is one of those cases that will leave you questioning how well we really know the people we love. Before we dive deep into this chilling case, welcome to Dark Motives, where we uncover the stories of love, betrayal, and crime that often remain hidden behind closed doors. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, so you never miss the kind of cases that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. And as always, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments below. I go through every one of them. Your support keeps this channel growing, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next in this case. Now let's rewind and piece together the journey that led a young woman, full of hope, to board that bus to Texas. What was supposed to be a simple weekend trip to see her boyfriend turned into the final hours of her life. Her name was Alyssa. Just 22 years old, she was the kind of young woman people described as bright, trusting, and full of life. She had grown up in a close-knit family in Mississippi, where her laughter often filled the room. Friends said Alyssa had a warm spirit and she dreamed of something bigger, to travel, to see the world, and to finally find a love that felt safe. A year earlier, she met Calvin through social media. He was older, charming, and living in Texas. To Alyssa, Calvin seemed stable, someone who could give her the kind of attention and affection she had always wanted. The long-distance relationship quickly grew intense. They texted for hours, called late into the night, and promised each other that soon they would finally be together in person. Her family had concerns. They told her, "You barely know him, be careful." But like many young women in love, Alyssa brushed it off. She trusted Calvin. She believed he was the one. And so, when he invited her to spend a weekend with him in Texas, she packed a small bag, boarded a bus, and sent her best friend a message that read, "Wish me luck, girl. I'm finally going to see him." For Alyssa, this was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. But within 14 hours of that bus ride, her story would come to a tragic end. When Alyssa finally arrived in Texas, it was late afternoon. The long bus ride had drained her, but excitement carried her through the fatigue. Calvin was there, waiting outside the small station in his dark sedan. He smiled as she approached, and for a moment, everything felt right. Alyssa thought to herself, "This is it. I'm finally here with him." She had waited months for this, and now, reality and fantasy were colliding. But from the very beginning, something felt slightly off. Calvin wasn't as lively as he had been on their late-night phone calls. He seemed reserved, quiet, almost distracted. Alyssa tried to dismiss it, blaming the long day, but deep down her instincts picked up on something she couldn't explain. They drove to his small apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything fancy, but Alyssa didn't mind. She was focused on the idea of love, of finally spending time with the man who had filled her thoughts for the past year. He cooked a simple meal. They laughed lightly over dinner, but the silence between conversations stretched longer than she expected. Calvin would glance at her, then look away quickly, as if fighting to keep something hidden. Later that evening, as they settled in, Alyssa noticed small details that didn't sit right. The apartment was sparsely decorated, no family photos, no personal touches, almost as if Calvin had built his life behind a wall of secrecy. She brushed it aside, convincing herself it was just how some men lived. But as the hours passed, curiosity grew. That night, Alyssa's excitement would turn into confusion, and confusion into fear. What she would soon uncover about Calvin inside that apartment would set in motion a chain of events that spiraled completely out of control, leaving Alyssa trapped in a situation she never imagined. As the night wore on, Alyssa began to sense that Calvin was hiding something. the way he shifted uncomfortably in his own space, the way he avoided certain questions. It didn't feel like the man she had come to know through countless calls and texts. She tried to ignore it, but her instincts kept whispering that something was very wrong. At one point, Alyssa excused herself to use the bathroom. On her way back, she noticed a drawer slightly open in the corner of the bedroom. She hadn't been snooping, but the glint of folded papers sticking out caught her eye. Inside were documents, scattered medical forms, receipts, and personal items that didn't quite add up to the man Calvin had presented himself to be. She froze, her heart racing as she quickly pushed the drawer shut before he could notice. Back at the table, Calvin studied her face, as if he knew she had seen something. His calm demeanor shifted. The once charming man she thought she knew now carried a look in his eyes she had never seen before. Cold, guarded, almost threatening. The air in the room grew heavier with every passing second. Alyssa tried to steady herself. She forced a smile, tried to change the subject, but Calvin barely responded. His voice lowered, his words clipped. It was in that moment she realized she wasn't sitting across from the man she had fallen in love with online. She was sitting across from a stranger. That uneasy silence stretched into the night. Alyssa had no idea that what she had just stumbled upon wasn't just a minor secret. It was a truth so dark and deeply hidden that Calvin would do anything to keep it from being exposed, even if it meant silencing the one person who had come all the way to Texas to be with him. By midnight, the weight of unspoken truths pressed too heavily on Alyssa to ignore. She had come this far, invested her heart and trust, and now the uneasiness inside her refused to stay silent. Sitting across from Calvin on the worn couch, she finally asked the question that had been clawing at her since she arrived. "Why do you keep hiding things from me?" Calvin froze. His eyes narrowed as though he hadn't expected her to be so direct. He muttered something under his breath, trying to deflect, but Alyssa didn't back down. She reminded him of the documents she had accidentally seen, the strange behavior, the way he seemed like a completely different man from the one she had come to know online. The room shifted instantly. Calvin's charm collapsed, and in its place came a chilling expression. He leaned forward, his voice low but sharp, and told her she had no right to dig into his private life. Alyssa, her hands trembling but her voice steady, fired back that she deserved to know who he really was, especially after traveling hundreds of miles to be with him. What followed was a tense silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Calvin's eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, and Alyssa felt her stomach drop. In that moment she knew. Whatever secret he was hiding, it wasn't something harmless. It was dangerous. And she had just crossed a line he never wanted crossed. That confrontation marked the point of no return. Alyssa's questions had stripped away the fragile mask Calvin wore, and now she sat in a stranger's apartment, staring into the eyes of a man who no longer looked like her boyfriend, but like a predator cornered with nowhere to hide. The silence didn't last long. Calvin suddenly stood up, pacing the room with heavy steps, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Alyssa's heart began to pound. She had never seen this side of him. The charm, the warmth, the tenderness he once used to pull her in had completely evaporated. What remained was anger, raw and barely contained. He turned toward her and demanded to know what she had seen. Alyssa tried to steady her voice, telling him she didn't mean to pry, that she only wanted honesty. But her calm words only seemed to ignite him further. His tone rose, his movements sharper, and the apartment that once felt like a safe haven suddenly became a trap. Alyssa's instincts screamed for her to leave. She reached for her phone, subtly at first, but Calvin noticed. His reaction was immediate. He snatched it from her hand, his face twisted with rage. "You're not calling anyone," he hissed. That single moment stripped away any illusion of safety. Alyssa realized she wasn't just dealing with a secretive man. She was face to face with someone who would do anything to protect what he was hiding. She pleaded with him, reminding him of their bond, of the months they spent building trust from afar. But Calvin wasn't hearing her anymore. His breathing was heavy, his eyes unrecognizable. Whatever connection they had was gone, replaced by a dangerous man cornered by his own lies. And as the clock ticked deeper into the night, Alyssa understood the terrifying truth. She was no longer a guest in his apartment. She was a prisoner, trapped in the grip of a man who was unraveling right before her eyes. The argument escalated quickly. Alyssa stood up, her voice cracking as she begged him to let her go. But Calvin's face hardened. His movements became erratic, his voice no longer steady but filled with fury. He cornered her against the wall, shouting words that barely made sense, as though the secret he had been guarding was now pushing him toward a breaking point he couldn't control. Alyssa tried to push past him, desperate to reach the door, but Calvin shoved her back with a force that stunned her. The impact rattled her bones, and in that instant she realized she was in mortal danger. This wasn't just a fight. This was survival. She screamed, hoping someone in the neighboring apartments might hear, but Calvin's rage only grew louder than her cries. He grabbed her by the arms, holding her so tightly that bruises began forming instantly. Alyssa struggled, kicking, clawing, doing everything she could to free herself. But Calvin was stronger, consumed by a violent desperation that seemed unstoppable. The struggle spilled into the bedroom, the sound of objects crashing to the floor echoing through the thin walls. A lamp shattered, drawers slammed, and still, Alyssa fought with everything inside her, her will to live fueling every last movement. But Calvin's grip only tightened, his anger rising with each passing second. What happened next would end the fight forever. In one swift, brutal moment, Calvin overpowered her completely. The apartment fell into a haunting silence, a silence that marked the end of Alyssa's voice, her laughter, her dreams. 14 hours after she had boarded that bus to Texas, the young woman who came searching for love had been silenced forever, by the very man she trusted most. The silence that followed was deafening. Calvin stood over Alyssa's lifeless body, his chest heaving, his hands trembling. For the first time that night, reality seemed to sink in. The woman who had loved him, who had trusted him enough to travel across state lines, was gone, and it was his own hands that had taken her life. Panic set in. He began pacing the apartment, muttering to himself, searching for a way out of the nightmare he had created. He dragged her body into the bedroom, pulling the curtain shut as though darkness could hide the truth. He wiped down surfaces, collected anything that might trace back to their final struggle, but no amount of frantic cleaning could erase the blood that stained the carpet, or the guilt now carved into his mind. Hours passed as he tried to think of a plan. He considered fleeing, disappearing into another city, but every option ended the same, with the image of Alyssa lying there, haunting him. His so-called secret was safe, but at a cost far greater than he ever imagined. What Calvin didn't realize, however, was that Alyssa's disappearance had already set alarms ringing. Her family and friends, who expected her to check in after arriving in Texas, grew worried when her messages suddenly stopped. Calls went unanswered, texts were left unread, and by morning, concern turned into fear. Calvin's carefully guarded secret was now unraveling faster than he could contain it, because while he sat in that dimly lit apartment, staring at the consequences of his violence, investigators were already beginning to trace Alyssa's last steps, and every road led straight back to him. By the following morning, Alyssa's family was in full panic. She had promised to call once she arrived safely in Texas, but hours passed with nothing but silence. Her best friend, the last person to hear from her, contacted her parents, and soon a missing persons report was filed. Police wasted no time retracing her last known movements. Investigators learned she had boarded a bus headed for Texas and matched her ticket purchase with surveillance footage from the station. There, on the grainy video, Alyssa could be seen stepping off the bus, greeted by Calvin. That was the last time she was seen alive. Officers quickly identified Calvin as the man she had traveled to meet. When detectives knocked on his door, he hesitated to answer, his voice shaky when he finally let them in. The apartment was dim, curtains drawn, and though Calvin tried to appear calm, his nervous pacing betrayed him. Police began asking questions, and Calvin's answers didn't add up. He claimed Alyssa had never arrived, that maybe she changed her plans at the last minute. But investigators already knew he was lying. A neighbor had reported hearing loud arguments and crashing sounds the night before, and when officers pressed harder, Calvin's composure cracked. A search of the apartment revealed the undeniable truth. Hidden behind the bedroom door, investigators discovered Alyssa's body. The sight was chilling. A young woman who had traveled for love, now lifeless in a stranger's home. Calvin was immediately placed under arrest, his desperate lies unraveling with every piece of evidence collected. Calvin was taken into custody, his face pale and expressionless as officers led him out of the apartment. The case against him was airtight. Alyssa's body, the neighbor's testimony, the surveillance footage, and his own inconsistent statements. Prosecutors painted the picture of a man living a lie, willing to kill to keep his secrets buried. In court, Alyssa's family sat through every painful detail. They listened as evidence revealed how she had trusted Calvin, only to walk straight into the hands of the man who would end her life. Tears filled the courtroom when her best friend recalled the last message Alyssa sent before boarding that bus. "Wish me luck, girl. I'm finally going to see him." That message, once filled with hope, now echoed with unbearable heartbreak. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a guilty verdict. Calvin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Alyssa's family, there was some sense of justice, but no sentence could ever bring back the young woman who had been stolen from them. Alyssa's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest truths. Her case stands as a warning, urging us all to trust our instincts, to listen to the red flags, and to never ignore the uneasy feeling that something isn't right. Thank you for watching this case on Dark Motives. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Until next time, stay safe and remember, behind every smile there could be a motive you'll never see coming.